Could you tell us how it was that Ron came to be involved with the restoration of the Abbey?
Okay. Ron worked for his father's firm. Ron was 15 in 1942 and he came back from being evacuated. And his father, Harry, rather cleverly decided that he would apprentice him as a glazier. During the war, when he was apprenticed, they used to replace windows that were blown out in London. And during that period, the story goes that one of the windows that they were replacing were the windows in the central London synagogue. And they worked out of St Vincent Street in London, and Reginald Bell, who was the uncle of Michael Farrar Bell, worked in Regent Street, and they encountered each other as to the work they were doing, and Reginald Bell started employing Harry to do some of the work. Michael Farrar Bell was really fundamentally an artist, and he's better known for his artistry on pub signs. And he was notorious for getting measurements for commissions wrong. Invariably they were too small, and most of the windows had to be remade with borders round them. So Reginald got Harry to measure the windows, and in most of the commissions that they took on, Harry measured the windows. So when it came to Bath Abbey, he was a natural choice. So Michael Farrar Bell brought with him not local craftsmen, he brought with him firms and people like Harry that they'd previously worked with. And some of them came from London and some of them came from elsewhere. But most of them came from their experience of working previously with the Clayton and Bell firm.
Can you describe how they would have repaired the glass of the east window to make the panels that we see today?
That would have been done by Clayton and Bell's fabricators, by their glass artists. And Clayton and Bell put the original window in. Unfortunately, the original drawings were lost in the London bombings during the war, so the only way they could actually reproduce it was to look at photographs and any other information that they happened to have left over at their main office. The window artists and fabricators, they would make up the lancets, and the lancets are one of the single panels that you see between two mullions, and they are made up in sections, in panels, and they're built up from the bottom, and you have one panel, then another panel sits on top of it. It sits in a little groove, a lap it's called, and then you build them up gradually. So what Harry and Ron would have done was they would have worked with those craftsmen on site, because it was Harry and Ron's job to align the panels and to slot them in place and make sure that they matched up with the saddle bars, because the mullions have a groove either side, one's deeper than the other, and so you shunt the lancet one way and then you shunt it back and you line it up so it's centred, and it has to be centred not only left to right but also up and down, so you can't see the joins. And that would have been Harry and Ron's job, and then they would have put them probably in from the outside on scaffolding, using the mason's scaffolding. The individual panels and individual windows would have been brought up through the scaffolding, either carried, individual bits, or roped up. Generally, as far as I know, they would have been carried. So again, we're back to carrying quite considerable weights. And they would have cemented them in from the outside, and then they would come in, and then from ladders they would have done the pointing. And that's the cementing and mortaring in from the inside. And the mortar would have been made up with lime mortar and crushed stone, so that it matched the Bath stone that you see from the main stonework.
We were talking earlier about the location in the Abbey, about where they were making up this lime mortar. Where was that?
That was in the aisle just in front of the altar, because if you're climbing up and down ladders, and quite long ladders for that matter, you don't really want to go very far. So although you were climbing up ladders, what would be the process is that you'd have a ladder, have a piece of wood across it so it was supported on the mullions and tied into the saddle bars if you could, where possible. and then anything that you had would be hauled up on ropes. And so the cement and the tools would be hauled up on ropes and then used. So having the lime mortar close by was a pretty good idea because it meant you didn't have to go very far. They would use the mortar, they would press it in with their fingers if they had to, if it was a bit difficult. And other than that, they would have pressed it in with a very small trowel and smoothed it off with the trowel. And generally, they might have also smoothed it off completely with a very slightly damp rag, so you get that complete flat surface. The best way to determine whether you had got it straight or flat was to run your hand over it and to feel it. And the very fact of touching it would tell you if it was undulating or it wasn't flat or safe. And similarly with the mortar, he could run his fingers over the mortar and say, well, yeah, that's flat and that's square, once it's started to set, and adjust it if necessary. In April of 1952, with the help of the Bath Fire Service, Harry used their ladder escape to measure on the outside the face of the great east window. Harry and Ron worked with stained glass fabricators to position a trowel lancet in the far right of the lower tier, and in the following year, in April, they completed the first tier. In August 1954, it was found that the stonework above the first tier was unsafe, so fitting the glass had to be stopped to allow the stonemasons to carry out their repairs. Because of the damage that they found, they actually put in the majority of the window in 5 weeks, and that's the 5 weeks of the harsh winter between January and February. And it's just unimaginable of the well, I wouldn't say dedication, but the fact that they actually did it in horrendously snowy conditions. They would have had a bit of bother with the lime mortar because, of course, it's temperature sensitive, but strangely it actually goes off better in slightly damp weather.
And they were working hugely long hours as well, weren't they, when they were working in Bath?
Well, the job was the main thing, and the job was a case of getting it done. Because they had a workshop in London that opened on Saturday mornings, they had to try and get certain jobs done within the week. And they worked long hours. Harry talked about 6:30 to 9 o'clock. But if you took it into the context of the winter, well, they would have been working beyond daylight hours. And in their case, they would have worked from hurricane lamps. So they would have been in this building, and Ron said they quite often worked alone. So they would have been the only 2 people in the building at night time in this hurricane lamp in the winter. And he used to say it was quite spooky because you just have this single glow and you're concentrating on what you're doing and you're doing it to the highest standard that you can do under those conditions. Harry sent a postcard home to tell his wife Ethel and the boys that the great east window was complete. It's dated the 10th of February 1955. Dear Ethel and boys, Thursday. Just a note hoping you are all okay. We have finished the job and will be coming back first train Friday. We have been getting up at 6 and working until 9 p.m. Well, cheers until tomorrow. Love to all, Harry. The image on the postcard shows the east window with green glass, and the back has Michael Farabell's designed coronation stamp.
And then when they had the service for the dedication of the window in March 55, do you know if Ron or Harry were present at that service?
I don't know whether they were present, and I'm pretty sure they weren't. Like everything else, it's generally the artist or the commissioner of a window that's remembered. Very few people think of the person who actually put it in, the stonemason or the glazier that put it in, but we are the fortunate few to know that, at least I can say, yes, for a few moments in history this gifted artisan will be remembered because I can say I knew the man who put in the great east window of Bath Abbey. Your visitors should marvel at this wonderful window and may consider the quality of the finishing of the lancets close to the altar. But I also hope that they will spare a thought for Ron, climbing all that way to the top of the window on an 80-foot ladder, pausing briefly to view the river below him through the sparkling bright hues of the stained glass, before cementing in the spandrels with the same amount of care. He was not yet 28.